Hey, Patrick. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jason Flame from the Master Motivation Podcast. And guys, I am having just a little bit of technical difficulty as that video was playing. Somehow my sound cut out. So, Patrick, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just adjust my audio on my side because I'm not hearing you in my headset. Let's try that one more time. All right, Patrick, give me a check 1, 2.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Go. There we go. Listen, sometimes when you go live, these things happen. And yeah, I'm glad I was able to adjust it very quickly. Well, again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Flame, host of the Master Motivation Podcast, where I am so excited that each and every week I get to bring to you guests that are going to have some motivation, inspiration, and education by telling their story. And I hope you guys enjoy this one today. Please, of course, go to YouTube and subscribe to Master Motivation Podcast and share this video as you're watching with us today. My guest for today is Patrick Prager. He is the owner and head instructor of the Edge Martial Arts in Santa Clarita, California. He has been practicing American Tang Soo Do since 1996 and is a 6th-degree black belt under Grandmaster Mark Cox. Patrick has also been consistently training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for 7 years and recently received his brown belt from Professor James Uloth. When not doing martial arts, Patrick loves landscape and nature photography, often traveling to national parks with his wife and daughter. Patrick, thanks for being on the Master Motivation Podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for extending the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I near the end of this year, I'm often reminded that, you know, we scheduled this like last year, and you're probably wondering like, what so far away? And it's just, you know, the schedule is what the schedule is. And I've been looking forward to this one for a lot of reasons. You know, number one, I love to highlight friends of mine, especially in our organization that we train in. We have kind of a longer history than most of the guests that I've had on the show. We share an instructor. We share a love for martial arts and, of course, a love for our family. So let me just start the first question with, what is your motivation as a father, as a martial artist, as an instructor?
Yeah, fantastic question. It's hard to pinpoint a motivation. I definitely have a lot of core motivations. You know, you can't mention martial arts without discipline. So I think growing up, school was difficult for me, not because I didn't understand what to do or struggle with, you know, the homework, any of that stuff. It was more so that my brain was wired in a way where sitting in one spot for an extended period of time, going home, sitting in one spot for an extended period of time, doing homework, that was tricky. My brain was wired in a way where that was tricky. So I've had to develop the discipline to sit there and focus on tasks. And that was kind of an early motivation for me as a student. You know, sometimes we get martial artists that we speak to and they start as teens or adults, but I started as a little kid. And then taking that motivation of discipline and then extending it to my own students and now hopefully my daughter, that's a big one. And sometimes we think of the word discipline and it has kind of a negative connotation, right? We're disciplining somebody, but for me, it's definitely a positive thing. And I think that my life has really come together in the past decade, or if you want to say since I opened my school and had my daughter, because of looking at my life and really getting disciplined in certain areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you have demonstrated discipline in so many ways, you know, starting your own business and being able to stay on a budget and have a plan and teach classes in a way where your students are going to have success. As a martial artist, you know, consistently training is discipline in and of itself. I mean, especially, you know, 7 years to get to brown belt, all these years training in Tang Soo Do. But then also you discussed discipline as a man, as a husband, as a father, because, you know, you got a lot going on in your life and you have to make time to be with your family. And I dare to use the word balance because I never really think there is such a thing as a balance. Right. I think it's more of a juggling act than anything else. But you definitely have shown these in so many ways. And I'd love to dive in deeper on kind of each one of those categories. So let's start with martial arts, because that's the easiest one, right? You started martial arts at how old?
I think I was 8 years old when I started.
8. Okay. And you started with your brother, correct?
Correct. Yeah. We, like, as a common story in martial arts, you try all the various team sports. And I was good at all those. I had an after school program. I went to a Catholic grade school, and we had seasonal sports. So we had football and volleyball and basketball. I played baseball. I was good at all of them, but I found it difficult to rely on a team. And I
Mm-hmm.
really eventually landed in martial arts as a kid, and found that I really like that it's while you're in a class with other people, at the end of the day, it's an individual pursuit, and you rely on those around you to support you, but you're going to pass and fail based on your own merit.
Mm-hmm.
So I started that, and then about 3 months later, I'm the older brother, so my little brother kind of jumped in there,
Mm-hmm.
but we went all the way to third degree black belt together. He went off to law school and stuff, and I continued down the path.
Nice, nice. Um, Starting as a child is a different experience that many that start in their teens or start in as adult, don't understand our deep connection. Like, you probably don't have memories, before martial arts. A lot of like really strong, like
Right.
most of your memories revolve around when you earned your black belt, when you earned your 4th degree, when you opened your school, all these things that are going on. I mean, especially at 8, and so tell me a little bit more about what helped make you stick with it, or what helped you to stick with it. Of course, the discipline aspect, right? But what were some
Mm-hmm.
of your favorite things about martial arts that just kept you going?
For me, it's almost like it's tailor made for my personality, because there's these little checkpoints along the way
Hmm.
where you put in a certain amount of effort and you're rewarded. There's that next belt which unlocks the next set of techniques, or you get to this point where you see these cool teenagers ahead of you. They're part of this thing called black belt club. What's black belt club? So then you're striving to attain that. You get to black belt club. Oh my gosh, now I'm going to start testing for my first or second degree black belt. Now I might
Hmm.
join the demo team. So there was always this sense of progression along the way that
Hmm.
really kind of spoke to my personality. And if you look at kind of any of the other hobbies that I do, they all kind of share similar aspects of that. Whereas like a seasonal sport, a baseball, a basketball, didn't quite have that in the way that martial arts did. So that was definitely key for me. And then, like all of us that are Chatsworth students, at some point we just kind of like the combat, the fighting. That definitely spoke to me as someone who grew up in just love martial art movies, and you know Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and so on. The list is endless.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, so Tong Soo Do as a martial arts system, right? You earn a black belt anywhere from 3 to 5 years if you start, like at 8 years old, and go through all of our belts, right? It's relatively quickly moving quickly when
Mm-hmm.
you now compare that to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, right? I mean, it took you
Yes.
7 years to earn your brown belt in
Right.
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, whereas it probably took you 3.5, maybe 4 years at the most to earn your black belt in Tong Soo Do. Not
Yeah.
diminishing what Tong Soo Do has to offer, and not saying that Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is any better because of time. My point is, how do you encourage your students to participate in an activity that has such a delayed sense of gratification, where they're so used to? Because if you go from nothing and then you train in jiu-jitsu, it's you just that's what right? But now you
Right.
do, if you're doing Tong Soo Do and you're used to testing every 3 months, for example, right? Or
Yes.
getting a stripe every month. How do your students handle? Because I know you have a very successful Brazilian Jiu Jitsu program. How do your students handle, and how do you handle um, teaching them that delayed gratification? Because I think it's something it's really hard for people to understand. I almost feel like our American Tong Soo Do was bred because of the way society teaches us that we need gratification very quickly. Right? Do you understand my
Mm-hmm.
point?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I was a blue belt, for example, which is only the second belt in jiu-jitsu for 4 years. So that's, a single cloth piece of tape stripe on my belt, one per year, right?
Hmm.
Which in comparison to Tong Soo Do, you're getting multiple belts in that period of time.
Hmm.
So for kids, it's definitely a struggle. Um, I guess the answer to your question is the kids program and the adult program are treated slightly differently. Although even with the kids, as soon as a parent steps through that door, I just explain that, while our Tang Soo Do belts, there's a curriculum involved. When they practice and learn a certain set of skills, they're going to test at this period of time as long as they, meet these requirements and are disciplined along the way. In jiu-jitsu, it's entirely merit-based, so you're going to progress based on if your coach thinks you're ready, based on how you do against students, slightly above your level. Are you catching up to them? Does that start to seem like you're at their level? I think one thing that jiu-jitsu has that keeps people involved is each class is more exciting in that you're constantly fighting each other. So if you like that struggle, the grappling, the wrestling, and you like getting in there in the mix, you get that reward every class. Whereas sometimes in a Tang Soo Do class, you might have a class based entirely around the forms, right? Or the kicks. And of course, as instructors, we know for our kids programs that we have to structure in a way that still keeps it fresh and exciting for them. But jiu-jitsu has one inherent advantage where if you are the personality type where you like to get in there and actually, grapple with people, you get to do that every single class. Now, I also started jiu-jitsu as an adult. I started when I was 29 and I just turned 36 this year. So jiu-jitsu for me was very much an adult martial art. And it was so exciting for me because when I started, I had been doing Tang Soo Do for, I believe it was 20 years at that point. And then I got the opportunity to start as a white belt again, which I know for a lot of adults is something they dread. But for me, it was so exciting to be a beginner again after being, I guess, an expert, for a lack of a better term, in a separate martial art. So I was able to weather the storm of multiple years at a single belt level, 4 years at a blue belt level. One, because I understood what martial arts are about, and I had already been doing a separate one for 20 years. I understand it's a long process. Two, because it was fresh for me. It's something I could do almost selfishly for myself while also running my school, and it just happened to benefit my school. And then three is I enjoyed getting in there and grappling every day. So I could measure my progress against how I was doing against this superior person, and not judging myself based against them, but how was I doing against the previous version of myself, right? 6 months ago, they were tapping me 10 times in 5 minutes. All of a sudden, they're tapping me 7 times. And so I could see that progress, even though it wasn't with a belt or a piece of tape,
Well, I love the fact that you touched on starting again as a white belt and how most adults would dread that, right? Most adults would not want to go back. I mean, most people don't like to do things that they're not good at, just in general, right?
Absolutely.
And then when you're really good at something like martial arts, specific style of Tang Soo Do, and then you go to another style and start over, I just think that that's kind of a mindset that you have to be able to adopt that to be a long time martial artist. Many people will tell you that the longer they train, the more they learn about what they don't know. Right. And so I look at black belts, and you probably have this challenge as well, although I know that you have a really good black belt retention so far with your school, but black belts in our system seem to get they get a little bit complacent, right? And they don't continue to challenge themselves. It was one of the things that I always enjoyed. I was just talking to my son about this the other day, and he's getting ready to test for his black belt in Krav Maga, and he's already a 4th degree black belt in American Tang Soo Do. And he's like, Dad, as soon as I get my black belt in Krav, I can really start to focus on jiu-jitsu, and I really do want to compete and do some stuff. And whether he does or he doesn't, follow through with that, at least I'm proud to know that he has that mindset of, okay, cool, I'm good at this. Now I'm going to try to get good at something else. And I'm going to put a white belt on. I'm going to start again, work my way up. It is one of the greatest things about martial arts is having that ladder. But for the black belts in Tang Soo Do, the quote, "Success is a journey, not a destination," comes to mind, right? And I think so many people are focused on, okay, I'm going to get to 1st degree, and then I'm going to get to 2nd degree, and then I'm going to get to 3rd. And it's like, okay, well, when you get to 7th, 8th, 9th, what's next? Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to keep learning? How are you going to keep growing? Because as an instructor, you know this, that sometimes you can get to a point where your students really don't have anything new to learn from you. Like they've learned all the forms, they've learned all the kicks, they've learned all, and you got to keep challenging them. Otherwise, there's nothing really there's no real purpose or passion behind their training anymore. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the reasons, maybe I'm still trying to work this out, why I've been able to hang on to many of my black belts so far, is from the very beginning, from white belt, I constantly drill home that a black belt in American Tang Soo Do is simply a master of the basics.
Mm-hmm.
So you are achieving a black belt in Tang Soo Do, in comparison to Jiu Jitsu, which we made the comparison earlier. In Jiu Jitsu, they view a black belt as really a master of Jiu Jitsu. And we kind of look at a black belt in Tang Soo Do as almost a beginner, right? You've achieved that first step. Now
Mm-hmm.
you're ready to really dive in and delve into it. So that's something I try to reiterate to my black belts, and it's something they should be very proud of. But it's just a step.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is, you know, we've all been lucky enough to have all these fellow school owners around us, yourself being one of the, kind of the one at the forefront, where yourself, Grandmaster Cox, all these guys bring in these other martial arts, look at these other disciplines to keep things fresh for our students. So,
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's XMA and the trick stuff, and as well as Krav Maga, for me, it's jujitsu. We are almost forced to push ourselves. Luckily, it's something we truly enjoy, but we're forced
Mm-hmm.
to push ourselves to improve because we need to be able to keep offering things for our own students.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like you said, I have been fortunate to where so many of the martial artists that I learned from always, they always had their base, right? Tong Soo Do was always our base where we all started. But, Master Cox started doing Krav Maga 25, 30 years ago. And that became part of what we do. And I've had jujitsu, Japanese jujitsu in my school in the past. I've had XMA, I've had the Raptor system and program. I've learned from, Conrad Ercolano, who did a ton of different styles, always branching out and always trying to look at martial arts from a different point of view, because it's very easy. Any martial arts, it's very easy to have tunnel vision and think this is the style, this is the only style, there is nothing else. And we've been surrounded by people that really have opened up those blinders. Brian Nan was one of my main instructors early on, and he introduced so many different weapons and more jujitsu. So it's just awesome to see that we've been able to evolve and not
Yep.
be stuck. And so, we, I think that's what kind of binds us all together, is that we do have that same mentality of looking outside of the box a little bit and bringing in something that will help benefit our school or our students, and keep challenging not only ourselves, but challenging our students to keep them longer. I remember when I was a very new black belt. Black belt to me, like when we would do panels, right? And it would be like a pass fail. I was so hard. Like I didn't want to pass anybody to be a black belt, because I knew that once someone got to be a black belt, they would probably just, they're done. Like that was the peak for them, like getting their black belt and moving on. And so I always thought, man, I don't want this person to be a black belt, because they're just going to quit and they're going to leave. Until my own eyes opened up and said, yes, just like you said, first degree black belt is like literally a beginner. I look at first degree black belt as like, yeah, okay, you made that first step. Okay, now let's start to really learn and really grow. And Grandmaster Ichikawa said something that Chuck Norris said to him that always sticks with me. And he said, you're not a true martial artist, or you're not a true black belt until you test as a black belt for second degree. And then, so it's like you're a red belt wearing a black belt for a couple of years.
Right.
And he said this like on the day he presented us. And I was like, oh. but now I truly get it. Now I understand it. So let's talk about opening your school.
Yeah.
What prompted you to start a business and open your school? Because you went to college, right? And
Yes.
what did you go to college for?
I initially went to college. I went to Cal State Long Beach, and
Mm-hmm.
I was an art major. And then I transferred. I ended up transferring to CSUN because I had some health issues that we talked about before, and maybe we'll delve into. But I ended up transferring to Cal State Northridge and continued as an art major. And through my life, I essentially had two passions: art and martial arts. And I always thought that art was going to be the career path, and martial art was the thing I just did on the side. But just as you grow up and you start to reevaluate your priorities and your strengths and weaknesses, those two things just completely switched. So
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I wanted to make martial arts my career path, and then art was something I could do to, it's just something I'm always going to do in some capacity. Call it a hobby or what have you. But I knew
Mm-hmm.
that I needed to switch to martial arts as my career path from there.
And what were some of your initial thoughts or plans or goals when you started to, take that next step to actually going to get the business license, going to, uh, get things started? I mean, what was your whole plan?
Yeah. So I think I think I have a big strength that's also kind of a tiny weakness as a just a person and a business owner. Is once I've set my mind to something, I just think, okay, this is just what we're going to do, and I'm almost overly optimistic that everything's just going to work its way out. So
Right.
once I decided I'm going to open a business, then everything was just okay. These are just things I have to do to become a martial arts school owner. I had made up my mind, and there was no doubt in my mind. I opened it up with my mom, who still helps out to this day. She's in there a couple days a week. Her role has changed since she's become a four times grandma. Only one through me, but her role has changed. But initially, especially, she I was still pretty young, so I relied on her to help me with many of the business things. And she has the entirely opposite personality of very cautious and very planning forward. Whereas I'm just like, nope, we just got to go. This is what we're going to do. Everything will kind of work its way,
Mm-hmm.
work its way out on its own. So I think the partnership that we had really helped me initially. So I didn't have any real doubts once I made that decision, and all the steps I had to take to get there. Some were very frustrating. Finding even a space to go to that is within budget. Then dealing with the city. How are you going to get permits? All the back end stuff that people who don't ever open a business never really think or about or notice.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, those are and they're not necessarily strengths of people who have a brain wired for martial arts. So those are things I had to overcome, but I had no doubts along the way once I started down that path.
So you didn't really have a backup plan. You weren't thinking in the back of your mind, okay, if the martial arts thing doesn't work out, like I'm going to do this instead. You're more like a burn the ships and we're just going.
Yeah, well, I was working as a administrator at CSUN, Cal State Northridge, essentially just like a fancy title for a secretary for assistant dean there. So I just had a
Mm-hmm.
nice, steady government job that was making, fine money, not great money, but enough to kind of keep me afloat as I was going towards my goal. But I had no doubt that I was going to open a martial arts school. And I didn't start an after school program or anything. So I opened with 0 students on day one. But
Mm.
I guess that just goes back to that kind of almost insane optimism of I will work it out. I trust my level of martial arts. I trust my level of instruction. Luckily, I had taught for quite a bit for Mr. Cox at that point. I was teaching maybe 10 classes a week there, including all day Saturday, which is every belt level. So I had done quite a bit of experience with that, and I trusted my ability to teach. I knew once students filtered in that I would be able to keep them and they would find value in it. So I just had to find the actual space and location and jump into it.
Yeah. Well, that to me is a very bold and a very brave, risk to take of
Yeah.
having 0 students and going into a school. Now, I mean, a lot of people will do that, right? I learned from Mr. Chikawa because I started at a recreation center, and then he built up his program to open a school and then continue to use that program to feed the school. I followed that model. Just because that's all I knew. I didn't really know anything else. I mean, kind of like you, I didn't really have any business experience. I had a passion for martial arts. I knew that this is something I wanted to do. And, we both kind of just went for it. But, even with that optimistic attitude, you still face a lot of obstacles, right? And I mean, ignoring the total obvious, which was COVID, and
Right.
how that impacted us. Tell me a little bit about just kind of building from the ground up, going from, 0 to 50, 50 to 100 students and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I opened up in a very small location, maybe 1,000 square feet, and it was essentially a long rectangle. So not the most ideal space, but I was next to a Vons in a shopping center, so I had decent foot traffic going by. And I would say first 40, 50 students came by pretty naturally, pretty quickly. But then we kind of stalled there a little bit, maybe at around 50, 60 students. That was probably a stressful time. I think there are kind of benchmarks of owning a school, and going from 50 to 100, doubling your students is a difficult one. And then maybe 100 to 150 is another kind of big step. So it was definitely a challenge, but I just knew that given enough time to kind of get my name out there in the community, that people would come. So I very much relied on word of mouth. I'm not very good at marketing, I would say. That's not a big strength of mine, but I'm good at building a relationship with my students and the families in the school, keeping a level of instruction that I knew that they would spread the word, and just kind of relying on that has paid off. Now I have a lot of students that bring friends in and family members in and all that.
So what would you say are maybe the top 3 things that are the most important to you, but also the most impactful in creating that culture or creating those relationships with your students?
Sure. I think in a martial art, the most important for me is that what I'm teaching someone is going to keep them safe. I think that there are many activities that share qualities of martial arts, share athletic qualities, even discipline qualities. But if I'm going to call myself a martial arts school, I need to be confident that what I'm teaching my students will keep them safe. So that's a reason why, I've done amateur fights in the past. That's a reason why I compete in jiu-jitsu, and just rely on the skills and abilities of all my instructors, yourself, Master Cox, everyone. So that's definitely a big one. With that aside, the second thing is I need to make sure that I do care about the actual students themselves, and that they're more than just a number on the books to me. And I take quite a bit of interest in making sure that they have found kind of a home at my school, and that they're finding a community at my school, making friends there, because that is just going to pay dividends as a business owner. I don't have to worry about the business aspect if I can worry about forming relationships with the people there. I think those are the 2 big ones. I don't know. I would probably have to think a little bit about if there's like a third one. Those are really like my 2 kind of guiding lights, is making sure that they feel valued at the school, and that they know that they're more than just a number for me, and that they do find value. So they feel valued, and they find that value knowing that what I'm going to teach them will be effective for them. I don't want to arm them with a bunch of stuff that then they find themselves in a situation where they have to, God forbid, use it, and they wasted their time.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. That's a great way to explain that, that culture that you have in your school is that you are giving value and that they feel valued. I think that's a very simple way to explain that. Well, that's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about, we've mentioned some of your mentors, instructors, people that have poured into you. Of course, Mr. Cox and Professor Uloth. Tell me about some of the other people that have poured into you that maybe just a second to kind of give them a shout out and give them some love.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely Mr. Cox is the main one. Being the school owner that I grew up going to, Chatsworth Karate. Um, you know, Mr. Carlin is a huge influence on me. He taught, I would say, as time went on, he taught the majority of my classes when I was a black belt and old enough to really kind of form my identity as a martial artist. So Mr. Carlin had a huge influence. Mr. DeRocher for sure, out in Idaho now. Miss his presence down here. As an adult, I've been lucky enough to form relationships with people that I view as kind of moral and business leaders. Yourself being a big one, is I definitely keep a close eye on how you run your business, and how valuable family is to you, and take a lot of inspiration on that for my business. And then I have kind of a peer group. I test for. When I do test for my black belt, it's about every 5 years at this point, but I test with Michael Cox and with Brandon Kemmer. Michael Cox has taken on a huge leadership role at Chatsworth and is teaching a lot of classes. Brandon has his own school. So those guys, I get to be kind of training partners with, as well as I get to, for Brandon in particular, I get to kind of see the steps. He's made huge growth in his business recently as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in jiu-jitsu. Sergio Machado obviously is a huge influence on my Friday classes there, and James Uloth, who is my professor, my instructor.
Now, how did you find your jiu-jitsu instructor? Was that were you searching for someone? Were you introduced to him? How did that happen?
Yeah, pure happenstance. I mean, I guess networking is one way to describe it, but I had a childhood friend who went to grade school with me, who he was best friend with James's wife, and James Uloth happened to live in Santa Clarita. I opened my school in October 2016. James had gotten his black belt in June of 2016. But he's also a traveling working comedian, so he's a man of two lives as well. He was very interested in maybe running a program, teaching classes, but didn't really have time or interest in running a school. So we just kind of linked up and met up, and our personalities and our goals and our philosophies really ended up matching up nicely. Where he loves running the jiu-jitsu program with me, and being the main instructor there, but doesn't really seem to want to run his own school. He like I said, he's a comedian, so he doesn't have to deal with those stresses. So it worked out very well.
Well, it's a great match, and I mean, typically in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, I mean, there are many successful schools out there, so many, right? But it's also very often that you have a jiu-jitsu practitioner that likes to travel from one school to another, and it doesn't necessarily want to be, tied to his or her own school, right? And so, I mean, what a match for you that it worked out, right? And now your jiu-jitsu program is flourishing, and I see you have juniors, adults, your black belts are staying active. I mean, it's a great thing to see everybody so involved. You brought up, Brandon Kemmer and having a strong peer group to test with and to train with. I've been really lucky to train with Brandon as well, and Robbie, and so many more. It's so great to have that peer group. And you mentioned something about with Professor Uloth, that the values and the morals is so important too, that makes you a better person. We Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, right? We're so focused in on that with our peer group, and keeping our circle tight and strong. How does that affect you? How does that mold you? How does that make you feel?
Yeah. Well, it's what drives me, essentially. I think in a lot of ways, when I'm not afraid to admit it, that I think it's helpful to me that I have always this kind of voice in the back of my head that's saying, you need to prove yourself. Maybe you're not good enough. So, I've over the years managed to turn that into a positive voice, where it's not, you're not good enough. It's, you can keep working harder. There's more you can do. So with so many talented martial artists around me who are years ahead of me, you know, as far as their training and their skills, their business, the money they're making, whatever metric you want to do, I have a lot of people I can chase in a good way. So to then see all of you guys who are maybe a generation ahead of me, still testing for Krav Black Belt, still pushing this and pushing that when you don't necessarily need to, it gives me a great example to strive for.
Yeah, I know that voice really well. I know that voice, and I know many of us hear that voice. Sometimes it's Mr. Cox's voice saying, you know, don't be a cat.
Right. Yes,
but you know
cat.
what? A cat. We'll keep it PG. It's just, you know, that voice. I have heard that voice since I was probably very young. You know, I started martial arts when I was 10 years old, and I constantly hear that voice in my head of, you can do more, you can be better. And some people, man, that could just eat you up, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, you've taken that voice and you've turned it into a positive to help you to keep growing and to keep working, to keep training, to keep reaching for more. Because some people might say, well, when is enough enough? When are you satisfied? I've been asked that question a bunch of times, you know, and the only way I can answer it is never. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so thirsty and hungry for more knowledge. I mean, I don't know about you, but I read pretty regularly, and I'm always like, wow, like I'll read something and just like, bing, light bulb goes on. I'll be teaching a little dragons class, a 3-year-old, and I'll be like, whoa, like light bulb, you know, something just kind of, it's because when you're looking for that, that's how you keep growing. When you look for the, oh, I'm tired. Oh, I don't want to go in. Oh, I don't want to do it today. And it goes back to what we talked in the very beginning, is that discipline mindset. You know, of course, motivation is great, right? But motivation only lasts for so long. Motivation helps get you started. Discipline helps get you there and beyond, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So here's a question. My wife is watching, and she said, we were just talking about this morning. She said, how do you gain so many social media followers? She loves watching your photography, your jiu-jitsu, you know, so you've got a podcast that's really taken off. You've got a couple Instagram accounts that, I mean, are tens of thousands of people that follow you. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, all three of those, the podcast and the 2 Instagram accounts, you know, photography and the painting, where do you want to start? Which one do you want to start with? And just so you know, we're right at 39 minutes. I know we're gonna
we can go a couple more minutes. No problem. Yeah, absolutely. So as far as I guess we'll start with the big one, which is I'm close to 40,000 followers on just a painting account, a hobby account, which I started at the beginning of COVID, so 2020, I guess. Managed to accrue all these followers. For me, I think I stumbled into it a little bit. I just got lucky in that that whole hobby blew up. I think there's a company called Games Workshop which produces these miniatures, and you paint them and you play a game with them. And I think its company evaluation went from maybe 100 or 200 million to over $1 billion in COVID. So I kind of rode that wave as a social media person. But I think that my training, my formal training in art, and just my personality of hyper attention to detail is reflected in that art. I spend hundreds of hours, honestly, sometimes on painting these things that are about this big with a little magnifying glass. And I'm just willing to put in the hours that a lot of people are not. It's therapeutic for me, and it lets my mind kind of turn off from the business and all that stuff. So I use that, and then use my photography skills to then showcase, I guess, that attention to detail in a way that a lot of people don't. So it's like when you watch a YouTube video, you know, someone who maybe just uses their phone camera versus someone who spends the $2,000 on a professional camera and hires a camera person to walk them around. They're going to have kind of a leg up as far as the production quality. So I've managed to put that into just my photos on Instagram, and it's taken off.
Yeah, I mean, you have posted some pictures that are so amazing. I mean, I can only, you see the picture, but I could only imagine what it was like to actually be there in that moment, to
Yeah.
see some of the, the mountains and the rivers, lakes, just the background. I mean, but you get out and you go hiking quite a bit, and you're
Yeah.
out in nature a lot. Is that
Yeah. I have
something
my
that
Yosemite shirt on today.
is that something that you've been drawn to your whole life? When did that start?
Yeah, that all came from my dad.
Hmm.
My dad was the first photographer, and he passed away. Unfortunately, we went on so many trips to national parks as a kid. Would drive,
Hmm.
12 hours in the car and stay overnight, then another 12 hours. And as a teenager, I'd had enough. I was rebelling against it, unfortunately. And then he passed away when I was in my early 20s, and I inherited his camera. He bought a new DSLR camera, and I through that found a renewed love and interest in the outdoors. And my wife was a big hiker and grew up going to these national parks as well. So it's something we could do as a family. And
Hmm.
because I wasn't an art major anymore, I had kind of given up on drawing. I'd always done just classical pencil drawing. I was able to use this. Part of the reason I stopped is because I realized I'm not that creative, but I can replicate anything I see. So instead of trying to replicate it with a pencil, I'm like, why don't I just replicate it and interpret it through an actual camera lens? So I made that pivot that direction. So it kind of melded those two interests for me. Something I grew up doing with my dad and my family, and then the artistic side. It really enhances these trips. I get to spend time with my family and capture what I see in these amazing moments.
So that's pretty awesome. I don't know if I actually knew that your dad was a photographer. I knew that your father had passed away, and I knew that had
Hmm.
affected you greatly. But what an awesome way to honor him and a tribute to him in a way, and kind of carry on a legacy of his by taking on that very hobby that as a child, you go through your phases and then you don't appreciate it as much as a teenager. And now
Oh yeah,
probably more than ever, um, I think that every time I see one of your pictures, I'm gonna think like your dad would really like that picture. Your dad would
oh
have
yeah.
really liked to be there at that moment. How cool is that? That's so awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I often, it's a bittersweet feeling because unfortunately my dad passed away right before I jumped into all these things that are now a big part of who I am, my business, my daughter, you know, my love for photography that he enjoyed so much, even really
Mhm.
my marriage. He got to meet Katie, but had passed away before we were married. He got to miss some of that. I believe that he's still around. Luckily, that's part of my belief system. So I feel his presence in a way when I do go on these trips and it's a quiet morning and I'm sitting out there and it's 14 degrees and I woke up at 4:30 a.m. I can feel him standing right there. So it's something I can kind of keep in mind as I do that.
Wow, that's powerful. That's pretty awesome. That's really cool that you not only feel that, but you experience that and get to live with that. So
Right.
awesome. I'm glad we covered that. The only thing we didn't talk about as it relates to your art,
Hmm.
and your social media is your new podcast, right? And we'll kind of wrap
Yeah.
things up with this. You
Sure.
started a new podcast that kind of chronicled your Brazilian Jiu Jitsu journey, from early on, and you've already got a really great following just right off the
Yeah.
bat. You have that artistic nature about you, just to kind of be able to pull things that pique people's interest. What prompted you to do that?
I really when I started jujitsu, I enjoyed that kind of content, but just I liked seeing someone who was starting that journey, what they were thinking, what they were going through, but there wasn't that much of it, and there wasn't that much of it that at least I could relate to or spoke to me or was done in a way with a lot of thought, and definitely not from someone who was coming from a separate martial art. So it's called Karate Does Jiu Jitsu. And it's on YouTube, and it's something that I just kind of chronicle my training and often my tournament preparation. And now as I advance through the belts and lessons I try and take from the Tang Soo Do side into the Jiu Jitsu side. And, I'm just an open book there, I hope, where most of the, sometimes people who just take a cursory glance almost think that I'm just trying to show, me doing great things in jiu-jitsu. But if you look, it's mostly me losing every sparring round against people that are better than me, my coaches, with an occasional clip of me against someone who's a little lesser skilled than me, because there was something to be learned from that. But for me, it's really chronicling the journey of what I'm learning there, how I would prepare to compete as an adult, what it's like coming from a martial art, being 27, 28 years into it, and then starting over. And now I'm a little more advanced in jiu-jitsu, but it kind of chronicles that path.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I've enjoyed watching several of the videos. I mean, I love watching you compete. That's super fun. But I love your commentary on what's happening, what's kind of going on in your mind. What are you thinking about? What was the preparation behind it? I think it is pretty unique, especially because you do have that perspective as a traditional martial artist, Tang Soo Do practitioner that has not necessarily crossed over, because you cross train, it wasn't a switch. It's something that you do that enhances what we already do. So yeah, it's really been neat. So last question for you, because I don't want you to be late. Last question is, what is your advice to martial artists that are struggling to find their next challenge?
Okay. I think that you need to remember when you were a kid, or when those first weeks when you were deciding to join as an adult, initially as a martial artist, and the excitement you felt, and then the reasons why you started. Those are easily lost when you're 6 months, 12 months, 6 years in. But if you can put yourself almost in that childlike mindset, a lot of my hobbies are also kids' hobbies, right? I climb rocks. I play in nature. I paint little toys, right? And I do karate. So these are all things that people might think are kids' activities, but really have a depth to them if you pursue it, especially in martial arts. And if you can almost keep that childlike enthusiasm, and remember why you started, then even when you're 20 years in, you're going to always find that renewed enthusiasm.
I love that. I love that. I think it's so easy to get lost in the the day-to-day grind, that you're so focused on the next step, or you're so focused so far into the future of where you're trying to go, that you don't remember how much you enjoyed it, how excited you were for that first class. I mean, I almost posted something earlier today, because people often ask me, what are you going to do when you retire? And I'm like, why the hell would I ever want to retire from a career that I actually love? I've been in Texas for a week. I cannot wait to get back into my school and teach class tonight, because I know that feeling of excitement that I have. I also know that feeling of excitement that I want my students to have. And I mean, I just think that's the best way to keep the passion burning, is to keep reminding yourself of those beginnings. And, when you look at how far look at where you are now and how far you've come, you're like, wow, I've overcome a lot of stuff, since then. So pretty awesome. Good stuff. Well, hey, listen, I want to get you off here so you can go. But thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing. Feel like we probably could have gone, a whole lot longer, but maybe we'll do it again another time, and we'll catch up. But thanks for being on the show, and thank you everybody for watching today. Once again, please go to Master Motivation Podcast on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to share this video and check out all the other videos from the past. Share today's. Look at what we got coming up in the future. We got some great guests coming up. So thanks again to Patrick Prager for being on the show today.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we'll see you next time.